Hello, you're listening to My Pop 5, a pop culture podcast about people. In our show, we bring on guests to break down 5 pieces of pop culture that had an influence on them or helped shape them to become the people that they are today. I'm your host, Ryan, and today, one of our producers, Daniel, and I interview Helena Hawkes. She's a Los Angeles-based writer, director, and a self-proclaimed cinephile, painter, and soul and disco enthusiast. Helena has worked in Hollywood with the likes of Jason Blum of Blumhouse Productions and Leigh Wannel of the Saw and Insidious franchises. While she has a ton of love and fascination of horror, we take the time to go through a variety of different things that helped inspire her and shape the person that she is today. I really loved this conversation, and I know you will too. So without further ado, here's our episode with Helena Hawkes. Okay, we are here with Helena Hawkes here in Los Angeles, California. She's an incredible movie writer and she works in the film industry out here, and we are so excited to have you. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, trying to put a title on what I do is very, she's a very something.
No, I think you are you have such a passion for what you do, and I think it shows, right?
Thank
and so
you.
We'll talk a bit about your workings in the industry and some of the people you've worked with, but I think it's because you care so much about the industry and your craft specifically, and you have so many ideas and are so creative. Like, it's allowed you to get in some of the rooms that you have and do a lot of the things that you do. And so it's inspiring. And so
thanks.
I think titles are overrated anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, well, it's tough to put a label on anyone these days because it's like everything is so accessible that everyone has kind of, become a lot of things, which is exciting, especially in, the pandemic where you're like, oh, I can dip into writing, but also, painting or like doing some fun things. So it's a great time for exploration, I feel.
Yeah. And I also think that it's been one of those things that for a lot of people, you're trying to stop labeling yourself as one thing.
Yeah.
Did you see Soul?
I loved Soul.
Yeah.
I'm a little embarrassed to admit that I definitely cried at the end, but I did.
There's nothing to be embarrassed. I did too, and it was kind of it wasn't even the end for me. I think what was like most touching for me is like the moment that you realize that he realizes that, going to what I was saying, that like, it's not, I am a musician and labeling yourself as a musician, but like, some of the important things about life is just the living aspect. So like the vision when he's like thinking about himself at the ocean or tasting pecan pie or whatever it was, and like thinking about those life elements, like that's when I started tearing up.
Totally. I think as a creative, you kind of let it become all consuming. And I think one of the major themes that really, touched me in the movie is the fact that, sometimes life does pass you by when you're so consumed by your art, and that it's a vicious cycle, right? Like, you're like, oh, I want to be more present, but I can't stop thinking about this one thing that I'm really passionate about. But yeah, I loved Soul. It was so great.
Yeah, I really think they just did such a phenomenal job at capturing so many, like that one scene in particular, like I mentioned, it's just like, there are all the things that you just zoom by, but appreciate, right? I've never not heard someone say that, like, the beach is an amazing experience, or tasting food is amazing, but you kind of just skip past it.
Yeah, you forget what it feels like to have something for the first time, like re-experiencing something as if it were the first time, because you kind of take it for granted. But yeah, the whole movie is such a masterclass in storytelling, and also just the him saying the whole time, I've been waiting my whole life for this, and he's just like living for this one thing, and then when he gets it, he's like, oh, this wasn't what I was expecting. Yeah. So what do we do tomorrow? We do it all over again, You're like, oh no.
Yeah.
I think that was the part that really kind of, definitely the part you were talking about where he kind of looks back on all of those little moments in his life and kind of realizes the beauty in all of it. But really, that as a musician, that part where he's talking to her outside of the club and he's like, I don't feel how I thought I was going to feel.
Right.
And it was just, well, this is it. I thought I thought that the way that they kind of gave you kind of like the meaning of life story, but I think it was really mature.
Right. Oh, definitely. It's like so much so.
Yeah, no, it was heady
Yeah.
and deep,
Yeah.
for sure.
It's such a good, the whole thing. It's like the time and effort those movies take 5 years to make, and you're like, oh, this is why. Because
Yeah.
every detail is accounted for, and it's so well done. But yeah, it touches on a lot of themes that I think we can all relate to, even just as creators. But I loved it. It was so good.
Even the animation of him like playing piano and the instruments was so spot on. They probably used, motion capture or something.
Yeah, like real inspiration. Research rather really, goes into every aspect of it, and it's the most real that it could be because they do so much in the research process that I really respect, But yeah, it's a master in storytelling for sure.
Well, we're going to be talking about quite a few, of your favorite art pieces and things. Before we get into it, and if you don't have, you need to pull up the list or something, you can.
Yeah.
But can you name your top 5 with no context or anything real quick?
Yes, let's see if I can rattle them off. I am a big fan of Magritte, so I put Magritte, Master Blaster by Stevie Wonder, Big Fish by John August and Tim Burton, Meshes of the Afternoon and Atland by Maya Deren, and Culture as Weapon by Nato Thompson.
Yes. Now, we will spend a lot of time with each of those, but I do want to go back and get some of your background. So you grew up in Belen, New Mexico?
Yes, Valencia County, a little in Belen and Los Lunas, New Mexico, which I always joke, if you blink, you'll miss it for sure, but everyone knows everyone there. And I'm super glad that was where I was able to grow up, just because one, it's so much, more easygoing and chill in comparison to where I live now. And it also, like you were saying, just grounding a person before, really, and crafting and, getting your skill set crafted and taking time to really build a craft. You kind of have that there because there's no pressure to do anything, or at least for me. You can kind of experiment as much as you want without, I feel like even just now growing up in a world where there's so much social media and technology, I feel like growing up in that sweet spot where there wasn't that yet before middle school, I didn't feel like I had to create for anyone except myself, where now I feel like this is an overgeneralization where a lot of kids feel like they have to create to become influencers or YouTube stars. And I wish it would just be no, just create for yourself, because at the end of the day, when that wears off, what's left, know? So yeah.
No, absolutely. I grew up in Los Lunas. Yeah. So
we're rivals.
We are rivals. Yeah. One thing that I was thinking about as you were saying that was, if I was in high school at this time, I would think I had these long breaks after school ended, and when I would have to go to band practice or concerts or things like that. And I remember, if it was today, I probably would have sat there for 3 hours on my phone waiting for practice to start. When instead, at that time, it was me and other people in my friends walking to gas stations and goofing around. And I remember at one point I was super obsessed with the Temptations at one point.
Right.
And there was a movie, a VH1 movie that came out, TV movie. And so we brought in a boombox with the Temptation CDs, and we were learning the dances and stuff like that. But if it were today, I wouldn't have done that.
You were pre-TikTok.
I guess so. Yeah, I mean, I probably would have sat there on my phone watching, something on Netflix, and that would have been it.
Yeah, I mean, even just growing up in a house where, although I do wish, my mom was super creative and she's a painter. I think in a place like Belen and Los Lunas, it's kind of looked down upon to be a creator a little bit, or, you're seen as weird.
Yeah.
Where I wish I would have just not cared about what anyone thought and just created, been in theater and, done the things that I really, really wanted to do, but thought that I shouldn't or couldn't, because of a culture that's not as creator driven, but those times in my room when I was by myself and, growing up with 9 siblings was a lot. It's like, okay, I have this time for me and I'm just going to do everything and anything that I want to do.
9 siblings, that is a lot. Where do you fall in line?
They always joke that I'm the oldest, middle, and youngest. So it's a very yours, mine, and ours situation where my dad had 3 children from his first marriage. My mom had 1. I'm the only one from my mom and dad, and then they adopted 5 children. So it's very, it's like the, Partridge Family, or, we're all the Von Trapps in The Sound of Music. But yeah, so I'm right in the middle in all of it, but I've been all of the above for sure.
And is your family still in Belen?
Well, Slunas now, mostly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and no one's left. Like my brother is building a house next to my parents. Like it's such a tight-knit, way of living, where, before that, my brother was living in a big area of land where his mother-in-law lived across the, 2 acres away, and the aunt lived 2 acres away from that. So it's different here, where it's like completely different. You're lucky if you run into anyone during the day that not only because LA is just so car-based. So I feel like that, breeds a sense of loneliness and no one's really interacting with each other. But also I just didn't know anyone here.
Yeah.
We're now, sure, I'll run into a few people that I know, but yeah, the cultures are vastly different. But
yeah, it's interesting, all those things you said, because I maybe it's just that Valencia County type of experience, because I have the same thing where no one in my family is left. I'm kind of the only one who's ventured out. And my dad recently bought land in Los Lunas, saying like, oh, there's like all these lots.
This is the family land.
Yeah, for every one of the siblings, like you can build your house here and your brother can build your house here. And it's just like such an interesting thing.
Totally. To me, that it scares me a little bit. It's almost like, finding a family plot while everyone is still living a little bit.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So I'm definitely the black sheep in that sense, where I'm like, I will go back to New Mexico at some point. I think it's a great place to, raise a family and just also be a creator. Like my dream scenario is to have a little studio in like Santa Fe and be able to paint and write and make music and just do whatever I wanted. But still like kind of have 1 foot here, 1 foot there, so.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've always said that the dream situation is to like live somewhere like LA and have like a summer home, maybe on the plot of land that my dad has, but
exactly.
just to go back.
Yeah.
I have such fond memories and think it is a wonderful place to grow up.
Yeah,
and
it
so
really is.
I don't, and my whole family's there. So I think it would be not wrong, but bad for me to raise children or do any of that stuff and away from them and not get the chance for them to experience their grandparents or things like that.
Absolutely. If I had my way, I would just uproot everyone and move them to California.
Yes, agreed.
But I have yet to convince them. It's been a battle for sure, but maybe one day.
And I think that's why there is that saying that New Mexico is the land of entrapment.
I always say that, you guys are all trapped here.
Yeah.
The land of entrapment is definitely a true statement.
Sure. So you and I met in a very interesting way.
Yes.
You were in my brother's wedding.
Indeed.
And I was in my brother's wedding.
It feels like so long ago.
Yeah, it's been 5 years now.
Wow.
So yeah,
Amazing.
Time did fly. How do you know my sister-in-law?
Wow, memory lane. We were best friends in high school, like, thick as thieves. We met sophomore year, and then junior and senior year, pretty inseparable. We were in student council together, and, we did painting together, and we were super close then in college, and then through the church where she met Andrew. And so, she's definitely like one of my best friends from high school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
I obviously know my brother because he's my brother. No, but it was so cool. When you and I were first chatting there at the wedding, whether it was dress rehearsals or even at the wedding itself, I think it was at the very start of you starting to get involved with film things. And we have a common friend out here, Alex Deeds, Veronica's brother. She's part of the pod. And, shortly after the wedding, you had messaged me and like, oh, I would love to meet Alex. And so I know it was at the very early on stages of getting into the film world. So how did you get started and what was going on around that time actually?
So even starting in or at least starting in the film industry actually started quite a little bit sooner than actually meeting Alex. I think that was finally when I had built up the courage to be like, okay, I'm going to make something, I was actually on my first set in 6th grade,
Wow.
it was this really cheesy sci-fi original movie with Jonathan Sheck from That Thing You Do. He was married to Christina Applegate for a really long time. And I stayed up all night and we were running from fake aliens. And I was like, this is the most amazing thing ever. And I had always wanted to be a part of film or music in some sort of way. I just didn't know which one I would want to focus on or how to make it attainable in a place like New Mexico. And thankfully during that time, New Mexico had a really booming film industry that was happening, where a lot of movies were coming in to be filmed. So through that, I had started acting and taking acting classes. My acting teacher was this guy, Greg Serrano, who was in Legally Blonde. He was the gay pool boy. And I learned so much from him and, got an agent in New Mexico and was going on a ton of auditions. I really hated the audition process, though. It's brutal. And I just couldn't, especially during a very formative time in my life, I wasn't able to really open up so quickly to people, And so I booked a couple like tiny things, but it wasn't anything that would be like, okay, like I could really cut my teeth here, know? So I did a lot of extra work, did stand-in work. I was like Sarah Silverman's stand-in on A Million Ways to Die in the West, the Seth MacFarlane movie. So just like little things here and there that I was really invigorated me to be like, okay, like this is attainable, but only through acting? I hope not, And so I really hated the process and I was like, I'm just going to quit everything completely, And I don't know why. It was, I guess, my own naivete where I was like, oh, there's nothing else available other than acting to get into the industry. And so I started studying marketing instead in college. And I just remember this conversation with my mom. I was like near Zimmerman Library at UNM. And I was like, why am I not pursuing what I've always wanted to pursue? That's where I had just completely made a change. And I was like, okay, like I have to make a short film. I have to do all of these things. And then that's when I reached out to you to get in touch with Alex because one was too, I think a part of me was like, I need to find a director to direct, a script versus me just shooting the script. And then when I met with Alex and Josh at the time, they were like, you should direct this. Like, why? What? Yeah. That's crazy. And so, and I will say it's awful. I will never show it to it'll never see the light of day, but some of the stills are beautiful. I will maybe bring them out someday. Sure. But it was a great learning experience. And I learned a lot from Alex and Josh, who had been making movies for a really long time amongst themselves with, their core group of friends. But that's how I had kind of met everyone through film. Because Josh and Alex were really successful in the film program there at UNM. And then after that, I transferred to Chapman and moved here. So in my junior year of college. So
that's so cool.
It was quite the journey. I only knew one person out here, which was my brother's best friend from the military. And I just crashed in his spare bedroom for 3 months until I could like really save up enough money to get my own place. And then I found a place in Koreatown that was just awful, but at least it was a place to live. But, you know, those are the moments where you're like, okay, like, these are going to make or break me. Like, if I could just stick it out and, like, outlast the person next to me and really focus on what I want to do, then something will come about, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And that first step is always the one you have to take.
It's the hardest one.
It is the hardest, but you did it, you know? And, you know, everyone kind of, you know, my philosophy on this type of stuff, whether it's anything in the art or film industry, is they're all lottery tickets, you know? But I mean, if you don't even get that first ticket, there's no chance that you get chosen.
Oh, I wish it weren't built that way, right?
Yeah.
Like, the whole industry is for so long has been off of, you know, finding a lottery ticket through a person and being like, I just hope that they'll help me. And sometimes it's not like that at all, you know? And no, I feel like once I got out here, I got really lucky and put it, and I wasn't afraid to put in the work. And so, like, with the luck, it kind of just, once you get that first step, it just keeps, you know, going. And you keep meeting new people and you hopefully keep creating and all of that. I will say, like, the first couple of years here, it was really hard to create because you're just trying to stay afloat, you know, and just do a job.
Yeah.
Because it's not where you come from, like a trust fund or anything like that, where you're like, oh, I'm good, you know, like I can just create and everything's fine. No, the first couple of years here was definitely a lot of, you know, hustling for sure. Yeah.
And it paid off, right? You've made some connections in some capacity with. You're currently working with Leigh, is that correct?
Yeah. So I'm working as Leigh Wannel's apprentice, and it's been. I'm like, I tell everyone that I'm weary to say this, but 2020 was the best year of my life. One, because Leigh is so amazing, but I finally had time to really create and really, you know, focus on the things that I wanted to focus on.
Well, he was somehow, I think I know the name because he's somehow related to the Saw movies. Am I correct?
Yes, okay. Absolutely. Leigh was Adam in the Saw movies, and Leigh Wannel, and he wrote, I think, up to Saw 3, and directed and wrote the Insidious, the first, I think, all of the Insidious movies.
Oh, yeah.
I should know this.
Not anything. We're gonna make you sound like a pro.
He wrote the Insidious movies and directed one of the Insidious movies. And then he ventured off and has started just being a full-time director. He was James Wan's partner for a really long time. And James Wan, of course, is The Conjuring and Aquaman. And Leigh went and made this great, underrated movie called Upgrade, which is the coolest homage to those 80s action thriller movies like The Terminator, and, you know, we're kind of tech meets man a little bit. And that I met Leigh at South by Southwest. I was staying with my former boss who I was assisting, and we would go to these film festivals together, and I'll stay in a big house, and Leigh was staying with us, and that's where I first met him. And he won a prize at South by Southwest for Upgrade, and then from there he started writing Invisible Man, and that was his most recent movie that he came out with, and now he's working on Wolfman. So
cool.
Yeah, so he's been a busy guy, but it's been so amazing to just absorb everything that he does, especially being a newer director and primarily a writer, because it definitely shows me how much I want to go out and just play and, you know, direct. And, you know, he just directed a music video. And through that process, he really allowed me to be a part of it from start to finish through all of the decision making. And it was like, oh, this is totally what I was supposed to be doing this whole time, you know? So through that, I was like, okay, I need to go find some music videos to direct, some short films as I'm writing. So I'm going to start I just found one of my really good friends who I met at Blumhouse. He just put out an EP and asked me or it was kind of a mutual asking. I was like, I kind of need, So I'll be directing his music video coming up. So I'm really excited, and let's hope it's not terrible.
I'm sure it'll be amazing.
That's awesome. Can you share the name of the artist?
Oh, yeah. His name is James, or his artist name is R.I.P. James. And he is an amazing writer, director, an amazing musician. And, he makes beats in his room. And I really think that he has a ton of potential to, be a really successful artist in any shape or form. He just sent me this pilot that I'm like, why hasn't anyone thought of this? And I'm so angry that I had not thought of this before you. I really love creators like him. And I try to be a little bit of a, creative like that, where it's like, where it's more of a multi-hyphenate, like, Donald Glover or Seth MacFarlane, where, they're tapping into like various art forms, and sometimes annoyingly they're very good at all of them. I could only strive to be that, but yeah, he's amazing. And so we're finding DPs right now. I kind of want an all-female crew, which would be awesome.
We're actually interviewing Megan Fan.
Oh yeah, Megan's great,
and I know she's doing a lot of DP work too.
Yes. She did DP work on JJ, the short film that you guys worked on, and it looks great.
Yes, no, we're really excited. I do want to get into the art stuff here. First thing on the list that I was super excited about, because it was a movie I was obsessed with for a long time, is Big Fish.
Yes.
So when did you come across Big Fish, and why was it so impactful for you?
I wish I could say that it was during, the Oscar campaign for it, but during that time, I think when it came out, correct me, what year did it come out? Like
2003.
Yeah, so I was really young then. So I think like 7 or 8. So I wasn't like, let's go watch this Oscar bait movie, But I think I came across it later as, I was discovering, filmmaking versus just watching movies. And what struck me about it is the fact that it's just such a touching story, but it takes such this magical realism approach that really blew my mind. And I am attracted to just like this whimsy and darkness concurrently, and coexisting with one another. And that's exactly that movie. And it encapsulates so many themes that I really love, about family, and also it just toes such a tight walk balance of being heartwarming and scary, and also just, I think, spoke to me, this is a little cheesy, but like coming from such a small place like New Mexico, it kind of gives you this idea that anything is possible. And, don't be a big fish in a little pond, just like keep growing and keep evolving, and, keep going on adventures. And it just the direction too, and the script is pitch perfect. John August, what a master. And I really like the paternal through lines of that movie. There's just at the center of it is this father and son relationship, and it's a conflicting relationship for most of the time, and it really pays off at the end. I'm like, spoiler alert, the end at the lake is just such a beautiful thing, when all of these mystical sort of creatures that you think are fake come together. And sure, some of them are, figments of the father's imagination, but, who cares about reality, when storytelling can be so much bigger and exciting.
We'll get back to the show in just a moment. No, this isn't an ad read, but we do have a couple things that we'd love to share. I've been getting quite a few questions about how you can support the show. The truth is you're already doing it by listening, but if you're looking to do a little bit more, the best way is to support our show is to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Rating and reviewing truly does make all the difference for podcasts. So leave us a review, and in that review, tell us what your Pop 5 is, and we'll read it on the show. Another way to help us out is just following us on Instagram at MyPop5. We post short recaps of the show and include video or music clips that are referenced in the episode. They're some of our favorite pieces of content to produce. Anyway, thank you again for listening, and we'll get back to the show. You said a lot that I want to touch on, and I think there was a couple things. I think the first thing is I see parallels in your story and even some in mine of that big fish, small pond kind of mentality, right? I think there is that one of my favorite scenes that kind of touches on that is when he's a kid laying in bed and he's reading about the goldfish. And the goldfish is basically saying, if you keep it in a small pond, it's going to stay small.
It's going to stay small,
But if you take it to a bigger pond, that's only when it can grow. And so that's like a big theme for the movie. And, those parallels have rung true. I mean, I'm sure you only saw enormous growth and, development even in your own craft after leaving New Mexico.
Definitely. Yeah. I find, creativity is such a muscle that you have to consistently exercise, where there are some creators that can just churn stuff out and it's perfect. And I'm like, it's so annoying. But most of the time, especially, with this pilot that I've been working on and it's finally like in a great place, it's like that took 5 years to get to a point where it was just no notes were needed, And just through that process or writing the screenplay that I was writing for Blumhouse, it's like, if you're not fighting for that every day, like it's something that you lose, and it's not easy.
I think with the great directors or the great creators that you said that churn out great content, like you also don't see their bad days though too.
That's true. Yeah, it's like the Instagram mentality where you only see the highlight reel,
Yeah.
But yeah, and Tim Burton is such. I always I always feel a little embarrassed to say like Tim Burton is such a huge inspiration of mine because it's like he is obviously an amazingly talented director, but he's also not the most pretentious option, where you're like, I actually like, Paul Thomas Anderson.
Yeah.
But no, truly, like watching his stuff during such a formative time in my life, it really informed my ways of storytelling and things that I really gravitated towards, like Beetlejuice and, that dark and light balance and humor. But he is such, I still say to this day, I just want to find my own story that's like Beetlejuice or Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Like it's like one of my favorite movies of all time where it's just fun, but yeah.
I feel the same way about, I guess, what are some of your other favorite Tim Burton films?
Yeah, I would definitely say what I love first and foremost is Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Absolutely. Because one, it's his first feature that he made. It's so inspired and so much fun. And Paul Rubens as Pee-wee is so amazing. And him writing it with Phil Hartman, who is an amazing SNL writer and actor. It's just such a great script. And so when you think of the concept, right, it's like a bicycle thief, right? And you're like, but a funny version of that. And it's just so much fun, and my dream one day is to, of course, write a Pee-wee or Paul Rubens biopic that kind of has the same tonal references as Big Fish, where it's a little bit, whimsical and surreal, but still touch on his real life. But yeah, I would say Pee-wee's Big Adventure and then Beetlejuice would be my second favorite of his.
That's awesome. For, me personally, I would say watching Tim Burton and the emphasis on the macabre, I think kind of has influenced, I think he's finally getting his flowers, so to say, from people from our generation who were like, well, that totally formed my whole perspective on art and music, even with,
you wouldn't even think that. Yeah, and like Danny Elfman, Oingo Boingo. Like he never thought that he would be someone who would score music until Pee-wee's Big Adventure. And now it's like you can't think of any movie that's not scored by Danny Elfman, and it's amazing what they did on that tiny movie.
I think one of the things that is interesting is there was also like a subculture of like our youth that was so drawn to Nightmare Before Christmas or Edward Scissorhands and that type of vibe. You called on it saying it's not the most pretentious answer, but it's like if there is a generation of people that are being drawn to something, like that's also something that's very powerful. So pretentious or not, like you can't identify the merit, you know?
Totally. Yeah. It's like he did make these movies and these creations that do have a major cult following. And I kind of even feel like I would much rather have a cult following than an Oscar. You know, because it's like people really get what you're doing and really are fans of what you're doing. Like to me, if something didn't at first get as much recognition but people loved it, that to me is so much more valuable than a trophy on a shelf somewhere, you know?
And I think it also means that people will come back.
Yes, indeed.
See your next movie more so than the one Oscar you got.
Yes, and it's a brand. Yeah.
No, I was going to say from your point is I think also having a cult following, you'll kind of see the waves that art creates. Like you'll see it happen. People become so influenced. You know, the people who are really into a specific movie, you know, they're a diehard fan and then they want to go out and create something. So I think you can really see those influences in the people or coming from the people who have that, you know, kind of cult following.
Totally. And, you know, like him just kind of being a trailblazer and just being like, yeah, I'm going to make weird stuff and hopefully someone will like it. Like, you know, I was watching the making of A Nightmare Before Christmas and I had just recently been pitching a pilot around town and I was like, no one is responding to this because they're trying to put it in a box, you know, where when he first came up with the idea of Nightmare Before Christmas, they're like, this is too dark for Disney. And they were also trying to put that in a box without really trying to find a box to just put something weird and interesting in. And that was really inspiring to me because it was like, sure, it was made 10 years later, but look how successful it is, you know? So,
absolutely. Coming back to Big Fish, I think there was a couple of things that are really great, regardless of all the mystical stuff, which is beautiful. And, you know, the costume design is beautiful. Like, there's the story, I think, is what you were talking about, that father-son relationship, which is super valuable. I was wondering, has your perspective shifted at all watching it or rewatching it? Because for me, I'm very much sympathized with the father the first time I watched it, where I was just like, this guy's just awful. A jerk, you know? But as I've grown older, like I've understood the son's perspective a little bit more. And they only give you like 3 minutes at the beginning of the film to hear him say like, Dad, you're taking my wedding day away from me, you know? Have you shifted at all or has it always been team dad?
I also, you know, upon first viewing the movie, it is hard to see and I think that's the beauty of that through line and, you know, how it grounds the movie is you don't really know which side to take because, they both have really good opinions towards this. But I would say, you know, upon first viewing, it was a little bit like, okay, like, I did want the dad to be just honest, you know? Like, that was the one thing that I really craved. And that's what the son craved, right? Just like a little bit of honesty that just pulled back some layers on the facade to have a real conversation. I think that that's a genuine and, you know, not a huge ask, you know, like just be a little bit honest so that we can have a, you know, heart-to-heart conversation on your deathbed. And then, you know, we can talk about the, you know, glory days.
Or any point, right? I think it's clear that Ed Blum in the movie used storytelling to avoid things, right? To avoid the real stuff.
Yeah, he's like, a deflector.
Yeah, the hard stuff, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really tough. It reminds me also, have you seen Life of Pi or read Life of Pi? Yes. So like the whole like pinnacle of that movie is, and I don't remember the line, so I'll butcher it, but you know, something along the lines of, you know, one story has tigers and, you know, monkeys and a shipwreck and all of this stuff. Yeah. The other doesn't, you know, the ending is the same. We both arrive here. These people passed away. This stuff all happened. Which story do you like better?
Exactly.
Right?
I was blown away when I saw that movie in the theater. And those are great examples of like, you know, just how real life you need coping mechanisms, especially during these times where it's like, yeah, stuff is a little scary. It's like storytelling is the one thing, you know, that can save us from ourselves in those scenarios. And it's, which do you like better? It is fun with the tiger and this, you know, larger than life tale, you know, so.
Yeah, and the ending of Big Fish, which you alluded to, which I'd say, you know, no spoilers anymore. I mean, it's been 18 years. But like, you know, the dad at the end says, hey, like basically finish my story. And so being able to see, you know, both that there was fact in the people that arrived at his wedding. Sure, some of them were hyperbolic, you know, representations. And when you realize these are much more muted, you know, examples of the people referenced in the story. But then the son also then being able to take the step and he entered that fantasy land to finish the story. And so it doesn't.
So beautiful.
I know. They do such an amazing job. And you're right. It is just like a perfect script.
It's great. It is so good. I will always strive for that. I just quickly, like, I'm just in that, you know, Pee-wee's biopic. It's true. Like, I had done a lot of research, and it's a similar concept of, you know, which story do you like better, where it's like Paul Rubens was like, in order for Pee-wee to work, I have to get rid of Paul. And his whole life, you're like, which story do you like better, Paul's or Pee-wee's?
Yeah.
Some would argue Pee-wee's. And I love like that whole, you know, conflict. And it's a huge internal one there, where I would love to see that in a man, like Life of Pi, you know, those being pulled between the two worlds. But I love that sort of storytelling where you kind of see something for face value and the magical realism of it as well.
Yeah, and I think a lot of your stuff actually transitions really well together. You know, moving into some of the Maya Deren stuff, you know, like watching both Meshes of the Afternoon and Atlan, you know, this is very much more experimentalism in a lot of ways, right? But I think there's a lot of that too, where there is clear narrative and story in some of these things.
Yeah, I realized with my list, it's very, I was like, wow, there's nothing horror related, which is shocking. And it's all like surrealist, you know, things that, you know, touch upon real life, but make life bigger, which is exciting.
Yeah.
I think so.
And it's some might only just be perspective, right? I think like there is something to be said about what is objective and what else can be observed. But there's the also much more internal experience of living, which is the stuff you can't explain.
Yeah.
Because emotions impact things and, you know, your perception impacts things. So, you know, I think all of these kind of capture that. Sure, there may be an objective truth if you got 10 people in a room to say, hey, here's what happened.
The sky is blue.
Exactly, yes. Yeah. But there's also moments where the sky isn't blue.
Yeah.
Right? And there may be various different things that, you know, change that perspective, whether it's inhibitors or this smoke or any of these things, but it doesn't make that experience any less real.
Right.
So talk to me about Maya Deren and how did you come across her work and what kind of got you interested?
I feel that it was actually in New Mexico when I came across her work. I was taking a history of film class and I was completely just blown away. You know, the way she can tell a story through a glance or a cut is so cool. And for her time, I mean, she's at her peak in the 30s and 40s, like no woman was doing this. And what's so great is, you know, she was also an immigrant from, you know, I think Ukraine, and her camera person was a woman as well. Like it was a female duo making these really experimental things that could go up to bat with some of the greatest surrealists of, you know, and I was just really inspired by what she was doing, and, you know, even tried to recreate a couple of things with our mutual friend Anna, who knows Alex, and we were, you know, in the Rio Grande at a bridge, like, you know, her climbing up and, you know, also climbing up at the top of a parking garage to see the Albuquerque skyline, to see, you know, she's crawling into one landscape, from one landscape to another. And I just think that the idea of, and it's a very Lynchian thing too, where we all have that ground foundation of objective truth, and building upon that and warping it is something that always really excites me and just drives me as a creator in any shape or form. And what she was doing at the time is just revolutionary, and they're techniques that we still use to this day.
Yeah. Even like both from a storytelling and that surrealism aspects, and also just in pure film like work, you know, like there's just like some like establishing shots, or there's like in Meshes of the Afternoon when she's climbing up the stairs and like when she hits the wall, the camera turns. And then when she goes to the other side, it does the same thing. And I'm like, that's something that I would find so awesome in a 2021 movie.
Right.
And this was in the 40s.
Yeah, I'm like, Nolan did it, right? And I almost said Interstellar, but Nolan did it in Inception, where he kind of recreated where the whole set was spinning.
Yes.
Like the old Fred Astaire movie where he's like tapping on the ceiling. Instead of having this giant set that was spinning, she just did it with one flick of the wrist, if you will. It really creates this jarring, amazing technique that I was just revisiting recently in the preparation for like directing this music video that I'm directing. It's just like I was bringing reference to Tyler, the Creator Yonkers video, where it's just like these little camera techniques that heighten just regular realism that make it so amazing. And you wouldn't have thought of that in the 40s. It's like you said, like it definitely is still new now, you know? So
yeah, I always find it so interesting when, you know, the term that like, there's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah.
You know, and then you look at something, because that was one of the first things that we noticed. We were watching it and we were like, whoa, the cinematography is like so ahead of its time.
It's so much so,
You know, to think that it was, you know, going on 80 years ago at this point.
Right.
That there was always someone who kind of realized the limits, even at that point, and kind of tried to
subvert
experiment
them.
Right.
Yeah. And it's like, how can we do that now, right? If there's nothing new under the sun, it's like re-experience, like the whole soul of it all is how can we re-experience life, you know, for the first time. And even just with those camera movements, it's a little bit of that where it's like subversion of what a shared idea of what something is, you know? And that's something that really just inspires me about her work.
Yeah, in Meshes as well, that scene when she's like bending out of the window, like that is just like the shot.
It's haunting.
Yeah.
There's something about Meshes that is really haunting that I love. Like, I feel like it's totally a horror movie.
Absolutely.
You know, I desperately want to find a place in, you know, something that I do where I just rip off the mirror face, because it's terrifying.
Yeah.
Like, anyone with like a mirror for a face, it's just, you know, reflecting back to you. It's just such a simple trick, you know?
Yeah, and I was wondering, you know, I don't actually know this, and I'm sure there's probably research done into like what people think all of it means. But like, I always wondered like if that was like an aspect of like alluding to suicide in some capacity too.
Yeah, I mean, I always look for meaning in both of those, right? Like, what was the feeling that she was kind of in at that point? You know, like what was her state of mind that kind of reflected through her imagery? And I always wonder the same thing. I want to find some sort of, you know, background into like her mindset during that, for sure.
Yeah, and then even in Atland, that one was also like, I had no idea, but it was beautiful, right?
Yeah.
Like that one does some of those shots even more so, like climbing from the tree onto the table and then going into the river. But like what I was like trying to find meaning in some capacity, and maybe, you know, that's part of the joy is everyone kind of gets their own meaning out of it, is like I had this feeling that like she's trying to get to the chess table, right? To potentially play with whoever's playing or whatever the case is. And when she gets there, it leaves.
Yeah.
And then the ending, when all the other ladies are kind of at the seat getting it and she steals the piece and runs and that's the end of it, you know? I was wondering if there was like, she's finally at the table and it's like joyful.
Yeah,
like,
she like finally earned her place, you know? I and even just that, I love the simple trick of her just, her eye line moving with the chess pieces, and the pieces are moving, like how do they do that,
Especially back then.
Exactly. Yeah.
I have no idea. I mean, the only thing I could think of is like stop motion in some capacity.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was so crazy. And then it gave me, like, especially now in a 2021 lens, Queen's Gambit vibes.
Yes. I was going to post it the other day. I was like, Queen's Gambit before it was Queen's Gambit. But I'm like, this is such a niche reference. I don't think anyone would get it,
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, I did get Queen's Gambit vibes. Or like, Scott Frank, were you watching Meshes of the Afternoon or Atland in preparation for this? But yeah, I really love the chess moments in there. It's also just like, also gets into her mindset, right? Which is like, how can I strategically get through and maybe earn my place at the table,
Yeah.
But yeah, they're great pieces.
And maybe not, too. I mean, it could have nothing to do with that. She's like, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm just going to make these
We
shots.
had a chessboard on set. I thought it'd be cool,
Yeah, like no thought. And we're like, really digging into the meaning behind it all. And I think that's kind of what we do as consumers, period. It's like, what is the... It's such a human, innate impulse, right? To be like, what's the meaning behind this? When sometimes there isn't,
I think it's because of our desire to, like, understand and label things that we know.
Yeah.
And it goes opposite of what we said. We don't like that for ourselves. We feel like we are much more nuanced versions. But, as consumers, we want to be able to say, oh, that is blank.
Right.
We know that story.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that reminds me of like the word like something like a Rothko painting. Like you have someone looking at like a Rothko painting, and you hear it all the time where they're just like, I don't understand how this is being sold for millions of dollars or something like that.
But why?
Right. And so there's always, kind of I was definitely, one of those people kind of as a teenager.
Yeah.
And just kind of being, talking to, like a visual artist, their perspective is completely different.
Yeah. It's like just his color theory alone and, how he puts colors next to one another. It's like, I understand where people get kind of caught up on like, how could that be sold for millions of dollars? But it's also like, when you see one of his paintings, it's a Rothko. It's like, when you see those color pairings and the way in which it's applied, that's a Rothko painting. And there's something about, right? It's like watching a Tim Burton movie. It's Tim Burton. It's like that stamp of creativity that you're like, okay, this is this creator because it's authentic to themselves,
Sure.
But yeah, it is really hard to put labels on ourselves, but sometimes subconsciously it comes out who we are, like on the page or on a canvas or in film, which is, I always love reading someone else's work or seeing what they've painted or listen to music and like knowing them really well and seeing what's kind of bled through their personality, like what little things that I know about them. I'm like, oh, I know this about you and your dad. I see that like coming through.
Yeah.
Like that's one of my. I think I should have been a therapist because I love to analyze those things.
Yeah.
No one's gonna let me read their stuff ever again. But yeah, I really love that.
Yeah, so this art discussion, I think, helps us transition a bit. And, one of the things that was really cool is I was looking into, like, some Magritte work as soon as I finished some of the, like, Meshes in the Afternoon stuff. And that scene that I was talking about coming out the window and, like, the various different perspectives.
Yeah.
There's a piece that Magritte has called Popular Panorama.
Yeah.
That basically has, like, 3 different sets, and there's, like, a cutout that, like, brings you into that next set. And I was just like,
cool. Yeah.
There's such a like cool transition. So you mentioned your mom's an artist.
Yeah.
Is that a big reason as to how you were introduced?
Yeah, definitely a huge reason. And I think also there is a weird, I did not plan the weird surrealist through line, but I think I didn't realize how much of an inspiration it is, on the way I create. And, at least for my mom, like MC Escher was such a huge staple where, it was optical illusion and precision and surrealism at its finest. And she was and is, she's still alive, everyone. She's an amazing painter, and I always wanted to, and I learned a lot of techniques from her, working with acrylic and canvas, and I still to this day paint whenever I can because I do love the medium so much. Magritte is such an amazing example of what I'm kind of saying is like that dark and light and like that cheekiness and, the surrealism where he, just like the painting, this is not a pipe. Like it's a painting of a pipe. Like that's, like just like that really snarky, fun whimsy, but still touching on darker elements. That's something that really, I gravitate towards. But yes, my mom was a huge, person to kind of show me those sorts of traditional painters, especially Escher, for sure. But Magritte was someone that I kind of found on my own that I was like, oh, this totally embodies everything that I love. You know, just his use of optical illusion as well is so cool.
I think it's a great time to be a surrealist artist.
Yeah.
Because, you're kind of talking about just certain surrealist artists, and it's making me think of even something like Get Out.
Yeah.
I think it's like, it's like a horror movie, but it's not really a horror movie.
Right.
But it has that, like, I remember the first time watching it, I was like, this reminds me of something like the Twilight Zone or something
totally.
like that.
Yeah. It's very Twilight Zone, Hitchcockian for sure. Like it was amazing kind of being at Blumhouse when that was being conceived as well, because it's always interesting going into a Blumhouse screening because, movies are made so cheap. It's always a mixed bag. You never know what you're going to get. It's like Forrest Gump, movies are like a box of chocolate at Blumhouse. And going into the screening of Get Out, it's everything that you're saying where it's like, like these are not only dark issues, but the way that they're subverting and warping reality is so amazing. And just stepping out of one of those early test screenings there at the company, we were like, oh my gosh, like this is amazing. I love when things, because it also doesn't take itself so seriously, right? It's like it has humor in it, and which you need with a story that dark. It's like and Jordan being who he is, like the levity and the darkness really are balanced so well, and that's kind of what I've always wanted to strive to create, is that sort of balance between dark and light, for sure.
Well, and I think it was a perfect vehicle to tell a story with such a socially aware message.
Yeah.
Or, it was like the perfect way to take on something that, is definitely a part of the current zeitgeist.
Yeah.
But then to also turn it into something that just kind of completely goes outside of reality.
Right.
But it was, it's a truly genius movie. And I think it deserves all the praise that it gets.
Really does. It really does. And it also is like, okay, this was made for nothing, and look how much of an impact it made. And it's just subversion, like we were saying, of, things that we already know. Like I was reading this book recently called Hitmakers, where it's like, and going through and like working on this pilot that I was working on, some executives were telling me like, don't reinvent the wheel at every spoke. And I was, at first I was really angry to hear that. And I'm like, so much so that as a joke, my mom made a shirt and sent it to me that said reinventing the wheel at every spoke. But
that's so sweet.
I was crushed by it. But at the same time, there was an element of truth in that, right? Where it's like, I was reading this book, and what it said, basically, the whole thesis of the book is make something that is revolutionary and, subverts everything that we know and reinvents the wheel, so to speak, but kind of put it in a vehicle of what is known. And I was like, oh, that's great, because it's like how I think of Star Wars, right? Totally revolutionary concept at the time. But when you really peel back the layers, it's a Western in space, guys. You know, like it's something that everyone was really familiar with, but just subverted it and clothed it in a different way. And it's like, yeah, that's what we have to do now as creators, because everything has been created under the sun, you know? And that's really inspiring to me.
In the whole surrealist realm as well, I think of shows maybe like Atlanta.
Yeah.
If you're familiar with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's I think I want to say I remember Donald Glover saying himself that, you know, that's somebody said it, that's kind of the next frontier. We have to make something that is surreal.
Yeah.
That's the only way we can subvert expectations at this point.
I'll be waiting for that wave. I can't wait.
No, same here.
Yeah.
I love it.
Like, you know, I feel like now more than ever there aren't enough creators out there that are Lynchian, so to speak, or Tim Burton, where it's like that sort of surrealism bleeding through in cinema. You see it here or there, but there hasn't been anyone that has broken through recently where you're like, oh, that's they're like creating their own brand of cinema, you know, in terms of surrealism or any, you know, Jordan for sure. But I could think that Jordan Peele definitely has a more modern day Hitchcock sort of feel. So yeah.
It only opens doors though for hopefully people like you know.
Fingers crossed.
So I want to move on, you know, because I know we're running short on time here. But Stevie Wonder, Master Blaster.
Yeah, isn't
Tell
that
me
such
the story.
a deep
Tell me
cut?
the story. Yeah.
I am probably. I won't say the biggest, but absolutely the biggest Stevie Wonder fan. And it's been constant. Like I've always loved music. At one point I was like, okay, like I want to pursue this in the future. And this was before film, you know, like it was definitely my first love. And, you know, even recently with pandemic, like trying to write songs here or there, or just poetry that is, you know, melodic. And what I loved about in his work is, you know, he tells a story, but it's also like you're saying with Get Out, like it has this social message, right? And I remember very distinctly, I think I was about 11 years old, and we were driving home, and I remember hearing it on the radio for the first time and just breaking down in tears.
No way.
And we were driving home, and I will give my mom a lot of credit here because I was like, I have to get more like this is amazing. Like I have to go get more Stevie Wonder. And it just really affected me on an emotional level that she turned the car around and went and got me my first Stevie Wonder album. But just that song alone, you know, it is reggae, which I'm a huge soul music fan. I don't primarily listen to reggae, but this song in particular was made as an homage to Bob Marley. Bob Marley and Stevie Wonder were going to do this concert together. And this was before Bob had got cancer. And it was supposed to be kind of an event that talked about the issues at the time. So like in the song you hear, you know, people are being freed from poverty or war. And those were really heavy things to hear when you're 11-year-old. But there's something that is joyous and hopeful in the storytelling and the music in that song in particular that you're like, oh, change is possible. And that really, really affected me as a young person. I think, you know, living in the city is another great example of his where it's like, you know, you're seeing, it's a snapshot into a way that people are living that isn't glossy or glamorous and is hard work. And, you know, we're just trying to get by. And why does life have to be that way for everyone, you know? And I would say just in my trio of like social change songs that I've always really loved, it's like Living for the City, Master Blaster, and If I Can Dream by Elvis in he did it at the 1968 comeback special, where it's like, let's talk about all of these issues that are happening. And I don't feel like there are many songs that really do that anymore, where it's like, oh, like, let's talk about issues through music, but still clothe it in like something that is enjoyable and palatable for consumers. Like Marvin Gaye, there was like this huge fight that he had with Berry Gordy of Motown Records at the time, where it was like, oh, I want to create stuff that is saying something other than, you know, just these really glossy Motown records. And I could empathize with that. Like, that is, it's so amazing. And obviously just like the drums at the beginning of the music, it really packs a punch, Master Blaster does. And it's always on my playlist.
Yeah, I think it's like at 11 years old, being able to resonate with that is like so cool.
It speaks to him for sure. It's like he can meet so many, you know, people and kind of all really get through to the essence of what he's trying to, you know, say, and he does it with feeling, and that you then respond to it and emotionally as, you know, a listener, which is a rare talent that people, you know, can really do. Not many performers can really do that.
Do you still have that CD lying around anywhere? Do you know?
I have the record pressing.
Oh, cool.
I don't have the CD anymore, but I was like, I have to get this on vinyl. So I do have Hotter Than July on vinyl. I have most of his albums on vinyl. I'm just missing a couple. But yeah, I just got the Hotter Than July a few years ago.
There's a couple things I think are really cool about that, because you're right, he touches on so many things. I was watching a few live performances of it, and there are so many different things that, like, he's even still shifting some of the lyrical content to kind of shout out some of the stuff that's happening, you know, today in comparison to when it was first written. And I watched one that was like 2007, 2008 performance. And like in the middle of it, he's like, Barack Obama's going to be the next president, you know? And it's just like, oh man, he's just like interjecting some cool stuff. I thought it was interesting to kind of, as you were talking about people not really talking about some of the things that are going on currently, my mind just started turning to maybe like, what are some of the things like, and where is the opportunity for that kind of stuff to exist? And I think we did see a little bit of a wave of it with, you know, a lot of the stuff that happened last year, and mostly in hip hop music, you know, but then there's also bands like the 1975, for example, who are like really touching on topics of climate change. And,
or I think of even Lil Dicky's. That was like probably the most recent, which I love him. I love the show Dave. Like I love multi-hyphenate creators like him. But that's a great example where he also did a climate change video, which is really funny and, you know, amazing. And he partnered with all of these artists. And yeah, that's definitely a version of that happening today, but there's not much of it, which is a bummer.
Yeah. And because it is so powerful, which is what you were just talking about. You know, I think this is going to get a little meta, you know, especially in comparison to your last item here, but it's also part of the inception of our podcast, right? We love what culture can do to you at so many different stages, right? Pop culture specifically, you know. I remember the first time I heard songs that made me tear up, or, you know, in a similar vein, or TV episodes that changed my perspective of the world, right? You know, I grew up so sheltered in some ways, and, you know, there were so many things that opened up my eyes. But, you know, all of that being said, it's clear that art has a responsibility, and it hits so many people at so many different levels. And the last thing here you have is Nato Thompson's Culture as a Weapon. And he takes it from a different perspective. We kind of like to look at it like, what are the things we love about how things have shifted, but also understanding the responsibility that it has. It can shift things, whether that's politically or, you know, in business. And so how
either
did you come
good
across
or bad?
Good or bad, How did you come across his book, and what were some of your biggest takeaways?
Interesting story. It was 2017, and I was pretty tapped out. I was out here, and I was like, like stuff was happening. Like I was working at Blumhouse at the time, but I was feeling very unfulfilled. And part of that is because I was like, oh, I chose something that is so vapid. And it's like, how could I ever make a difference with what I've chosen as a career path? And I was feeling really conflicted. And I was like, okay, I'm going to quit everything. I'm going to go join the Peace Corps. And I was like, I just need to do something with my life that really enacts change and social change. And, you know, I was like, oh, like maybe I'll go back and study law and be, you know, a social justice lawyer like Amal Clooney. I so respect what she does. And so I was really at this point where I was like, obviously either something needs to change or you need to find a voice or a meaning or, you know, something of that nature. And I was traveling with my boss to San Francisco, and I went to the MoMA because I just try and find the museums everywhere I go. I was looking at Frank Stella's and Ellsworth Kelly's, and I was really inspired. And I went to the gift shop and I came across this book, and it felt, you know, there are some things when you're, you know, in a state of mind that feel like they find you almost, you know? And in that moment, I was like, I hate to get so cheesy and like, it was meant to be. But I feel like it definitely found me at a moment that I really needed to read that book and also see the consequences of, you know, what you create. And I guess I had never really considered consequences of like creating, right? Because it is a vapid thing. Like in a weird way, to create is inherently very narcissistic, because not only are you working out your own traumas and you know, your own thoughts, it's all about you when you create. You never, because even when you go into like, say, writing a script, they're like, never write for the audience, like write for yourself first.
Yeah.
Like that's where the truth comes from, which I believe that's true. But at the same time, it's like, how can you not think about others? I think that's why Stevie Wonder's Master Blaster is like, oh, like this is a guy that's using his art to think about others and try and make a difference thereof, you know? And so reading the book and seeing like, oh, like creators really have a huge platform and a huge voice that they can leverage to enact change and, you know, talk about things that they really care about. It's like, but also on the inverse of that, it's like there are times when people don't want to hear what creatives have to say. They're like, oh gosh, like there they go getting political, you know, like, and roll their eyes. But it's like, we all are living on the same planet to make it a better place, hopefully. And if we're not, then, you know, that's definitely where the trouble comes from. But the, you know, just even reading in there about the different, you know, artistic methods that they were taking in creating political advertisements, you know, TV ads at the time, it was like, oh, wow, like, yeah, what we're doing does say something. And I think being at Blumhouse when Get Out was coming out, and also, you know, The Hunt, that was really controversial. It was like, okay, like we have a lot, you know, more runway than we thought we did to say and make a statement, and for the good or bad, you know, like most recently I've been working on this screenplay that I've been working on for a couple of years, the idea where I'm like, I have to be really careful because it's pretty, you know, touchy, the subject matter. And I didn't realize how careful I had to be because there are consequences if you don't, you know, whole movements are made on the internet.
Yeah.
And we saw that in, you know, in elections, that media has a huge impact in which way it goes, and we have to really treat that with great care. So yeah, that's how the whole book came to be in my hands and how I digested it. But it really made an impact for sure.
And it sounds like it got you out of that rut a little bit.
It did, at least temporarily. Where it's like, okay, like now I have to build a platform, and, you know, in the future be able to have a space where I can, you know, make those changes. You know, if I ever reached a level of success that I could create a nonprofit that helped, because, growing up in New Mexico, like I said at the very beginning, there's not really a space for creatives. Like, creative programs in the education process are cut, and really malfunded. And I feel like at times that could be really therapeutic and healing and give kids purpose who wouldn't have purpose growing up in places that are below the poverty line, that I would really want in the future to, have a nonprofit that would create and fund inner city art programs and, that sort of thing. And that I was like, okay, if I could just keep working towards that goal and creating with that goal in mind, then I feel like I can get there, and make a change. But I have to, and I had this conversation exclusively and extensively with my mom, where it was like, okay, yeah, like I just have to put in my time and really build a career to then, make change. And of course make, small changes along the way that I can, that are accessible and whatnot, as little as like, funding the bailout project or,
Sure.
something like that. But things that I care about, and using art to get there. So
Yeah, when we were making JJ, the short film I did with Alex, one of the coolest things I saw is they did like a Seed and Spark campaign, right?
Yeah.
There was someone from London who like donated, I don't remember, some ridiculous amount of money, right?
Wow.
$1,000, right? Something like that. And was like, here. And no one knew who he was. And they were like, what? And so then they looked at his profile on Seed and Spark, and he said like, I just love film. I'm always jumping on here. So if you're coming to my profile because you don't know who I am, I love supporting like art like this. And
that's amazing.
And so it led me to start thinking like, oh, cool. Even if it's $10,
Yeah.
can I go on random people who are trying to fund their first album or their first something and make those little things there?
Yeah. Or just even trying to find ways in which to help your friends, like kind of cut through and, get through, like just any little thing to kind of inspire or keep someone going, right? Because there's nothing I hate more than seeing someone who is so talented and not really be able to reach their full potential for, either fiscal reasons or, whatnot. It's one of the things that makes me most sad. It's like fulfilling one's potential and making a difference in like an artist's life is, because then we can have more creatives that, break into a modern surrealist movement or a Dada movement, that sort of thing. And so, that was really inspiring. That's amazing that they did that. Whoever that was, thank you.
Yeah, I don't remember his name. We'll have Ronnie, add it because she messages him, it's updates, as we're completing the film. But to kind of put a bow on everything, I think, both with what we're doing with the podcast and I think with what's happening on the book is culture has such an impact on everyone's thoughts and emotions, right? And like when you think about your own decision making, it's hopefully rational, but I think a lot of the time emotion based, So if we already acknowledge that there's this one thing that impacts your thoughts and emotions at such a high level, like recognizing the importance in that is really both beautiful and terrifying.
Totally. Well, it also, creates a lens of our perception, like all of the pop culture that we, encounter along the way. Weirdly, it's like we take them like we take memories in a lot of way. And thinking every time I hear Master Blaster, I can think back to that moment in the car and hearing it for the first time. And it's like, weirdly, pop culture can be, a time capsule of sorts of like where you are in your life and whatnot. It's really so much more important than I think people realize.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get you out of here. We have quick, rapid fire 5 questions here for you.
Great.
Okay. So if you could be in a reality TV show, which would you choose?
Oh, that's a great question. Wow. Off the top of my mind, I feel like Survivor, perhaps.
Oh my God. So this has to be rapid fire, but I'm going to elaborate for a second. I just recently had been on such a huge Survivor kick.
Yeah.
And whenever the Super Bowl was coming on, I was like, oh, I wanted to watch the Super Bowl. but like I don't have cable or anything.
Yeah.
And so Paramount Plus was just coming out
Yeah.
and they were like, hey, if you download Paramount Plus, like free trial, you can watch the Super Bowl.
Right.
So I did. And then like I was like, oh, I want to utilize something else for this free trial.
Right.
And like Survivor was the first thing that popped up. And I had like been into it like a few seasons ago. And then I went on a binge of watching like 4 or 5 seasons just in that little trial period, like just to like really just eat it up.
It's so, yeah, I love Survivor. I would also do The Amazing Race because I'm like, I feel like I would thrive in that like fast-paced like race around the world.
Sure.
But yeah, those two for sure.
Awesome. So if any of our audience has never consumed any of the things that you mentioned on your Pop 5, what's the one that you want them to go experience right after they listen to this?
Ooh, good question. Definitely listen to Master Blaster first.
Okay. Awesome.
Oh, and also if you get a moment, there's the painting Magritte Empire of Light, which crazy enough, William Friedkin from The Exorcist is a huge Magritte fan, and the famous shot of the exorcist arriving at the house with the light coming in is inspired by Empire of Light, that painting.
That's amazing.
Yeah, those two.
So I know you've mentioned a couple times already that you're working on various pilots and projects and things.
Yeah.
But regardless, whatever your first project ends up being,
Yeah.
who are some people you would want in your dream cast for it?
Ooh, dream cast. Oh, gosh. Okay. So I will go off of the feature and the pilot that I'm currently working on and pitching. For the pilot, I think the 2 protagonists for this animated pilot that I've been working on for a really long time would either be John Hamm or Steve Carell.
Oh,
they would
nice.
be great as the lead. And then for the feature that I'm working on, I would love Jodie Comer to be, if you're listening, Jodie Comer, please, please be in my next movie. But yeah, those 2 for sure.
I hope she's listening.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. What's something you learned about yourself during the pandemic?
I learned that I really rebel against structure and just life, that I really need autonomy in my day to create, and that, as a creator, I kind of vary. And I like to experiment with different mediums for sure.
Awesome. Last one. What are 5 words you'd tell a past version of yourself?
Oh, gosh. Oh, that's a really tough one. Don't cry.
Okay.
But actually do cry
All right.
when you need to. Keep going. Don't lose hope. I'm telling these to myself right now. But stay determined.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything you want to promote or places people can go follow you or anything like that?
I mean, you can follow me on Instagram, Helena Hawkes, at Helena Hawkes. And hopefully soon, we're getting really close with this pilot. Maybe soon you'll be able to watch the pilot that we're working on, and maybe one day the feature I'm working on.
Well, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for
thank
coming.
you for having me.
We really loved seeing you and talking with you.
Yeah,
And
ditto. You guys are great. You have great questions.
thank you.
That'll do it for today's show. Thank you so much for listening. We had such amazing time with Helena and can't wait to see all the great work that she puts out. If you want to hear some clips of the songs or see visuals of the art we talked about or clips from the movies, check out our episode recaps that we feature on our Instagram. They're really fun, and you can see all of our past versions on Instagram as well. If you want to know where to follow us, you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at MyPop5. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts. We'll see you next week, and until then,